The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nebraska prairie, painting the weathered boards of the farmhouse in shades of amber and rust. Marigold Reeves stood on the porch, her calloused hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She didn't mind. Cold coffee was just another thing she'd grown accustomed to, like the ache in her lower back from sleeping on a straw mattress and the way men's eyes slid past her when they came to town. At 32, she was what the local women called past her bloom, a phrase that made her want to laugh and spit in equal measure. Her skin had been kissed by too many suns, turned the color of prairie wheat. Her dark hair, thick as a horse's mane, refused to stay pinned in the delicate styles favored by the banker's wife or the schoolteacher. Instead, she wore it in a simple braid that hung heavy between her shoulder blades, practical for the work that never seemed to end. The farmstead sprawled before her 40 acres of stubborn land that her father, Josiah Reeves, had wrestled from the wilderness with nothing but determination and a pair of oxen. Now it was hers, left to her when pneumonia took him last winter. The neighbors had whispered then, wondering what a woman alone would do with so much land. Some expected her to sell. Others waited for her to take a husband, any husband, just to keep the wolves both literal and figurative from the door. They didn't know Marigold had spent 4 years tending to dying men in field hospitals from Antietam to Appomattox. She'd held intestines in with her bare hands, cut bullets from flesh while men screamed for their mothers, and learned that the human body could endure far more than anyone imagined. After that, running a farm seemed almost peaceful, even with its endless challenges. She set the cup on the porch rail and rolled her shoulders, preparing for another day of work. The fence along the north pasture needed mending again. The well pump had started making a grinding noise that promised expensive repairs, and the roof of the barn leaked in 3 places, though she'd patched it twice already this spring. But it wasn't the work that bothered her. Work, she understood. Work had rules, patterns, outcomes you could predict. It was the silence that scraped against her nerves like a dull blade. Days could pass without her speaking to another soul, except the horses and the few chickens that had survived last winter's cold snap. Sometimes she found herself talking to them just to hear a voice, even if it was only her own. That's when she saw him. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the light or her mind playing games. But no, there was definitely a figure on horseback at the edge of the pine grove that marked the eastern boundary of her property. He sat still as a fence post, watching. Marigold's hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the doorframe. She'd learned long ago that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, but the man made no move to approach. He simply sat there, his horse occasionally shifting its weight, tail swishing at flies. She squinted against the morning glare. The distance was too great to make out features, but she could see he was a big man on a big horse, a bay that looked like it had seen hard miles. His hat was pulled low, and he wore what appeared to be a long duster despite the warming weather. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Finally, Marigold picked up the rifle, not pointing it but holding it in a way that made her intentions clear. The man touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that could have meant anything from greeting to goodbye, and turned his horse back into the shadows of the pines. She watched until he disappeared, then waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Her heart beat a little faster than it should have, and she told herself it was caution, nothing more. A woman alone had to be careful. That's all it was. But as she went about her morning chores, feeding the horses, checking the chickens, hauling water from the well, she found herself glancing toward the pine grove more often than necessary. The encounter had shaken something loose in her carefully ordered world, like a pebble thrown into still water. By noon, she'd convinced herself she was being foolish. Travelers passed through all the time, especially now that the railroad had made civilization seem closer than it was. Maybe he'd been lost, or looking for work, or any number of innocent explanations. Still, she kept the rifle closer than usual as she worked on the fence, driving posts into the hard-packed earth with fierce concentration. The sun was beginning its descent when she heard the creak of wagon wheels on the road. Elijah Hartley from the neighboring farm pulled up, his wife Pearl beside him on the bench seat. They were good people, church-going and kind, though Marigold knew they disapproved of her choices. "Afternoon, Miss Reeves," Elijah called out, tipping his hat. He always called her Miss, though she'd been married once, briefly, to a man who died of fever 3 months after their wedding. That had been before the war, in another lifetime. "Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Hartley." She walked over, wiping her hands on her work skirt. "What brings you out this way?" Pearl spoke up, her voice pitched with the excitement of someone who rarely got to deliver news. "There's a stranger in town. Came in yesterday, asking about work. Martha at the general store says he's got the look of trouble about him." "Big man," Elijah added. "Scar on his face. Keeps to himself. Sheriff Dawson's keeping an eye on him." Marigold's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Lots of men looking for work these days." "True enough," Elijah agreed. "But this one, well, just thought you should know. Woman alone and all." The phrase grated against her nerves like sand in a wound. "I appreciate the concern." Pearl leaned forward. "You know, my cousin Samuel is looking for a wife. He's got a good piece of land down near Cedar Creek." "I'm not looking for a husband, Mrs. Hartley." The words came out sharper than intended. Pearl's face pinched. "No need to be short, dear. We're only thinking of your welfare. This land is too much for a woman alone. Your father would want—" "My father taught me to work this land," Marigold interrupted. "Taught me to shoot, to mend, to plant, and to harvest. I reckon he'd want me to keep doing what he taught me." An uncomfortable silence settled over them. Finally, Elijah cleared his throat. "Well, you know where we are if you need anything." After they left, Marigold stood in the dusty yard, anger and loneliness warring in her chest. She knew they meant well. Everyone always meant well, but their well-meaning came wrapped in assumptions about what a woman could and couldn't do, should and shouldn't want. She thought about the war years, about holding a man's hand while he died calling for a sweetheart who would never know his last words. She thought about the field hospital after Gettysburg, when they'd run out of laudanum and she'd had to hold men down while the surgeon sawed through bone. She'd been 23 then, younger than the schoolteacher was now, and she'd done things that would turn Pearl Hartley's hair white. But that was the problem with being a woman who'd seen too much, done too much. You couldn't unknow things. You couldn't pretend to be satisfied with quilting bees and church socials when you'd felt the last heartbeat of 100 dying men beneath your fingertips. As darkness crept across the prairie, Marigold finished her chores and headed inside. The house felt too large and too small, at the same time too large for one person, too small to hold all the ghosts she carried. She heated leftover stew on the stove and ate standing up, too restless to sit. Later, as she prepared for bed, she found herself at the window, looking out toward the pine grove. The moon was rising, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Nothing moved except the grass, rippling like water in the night breeze. She thought about the stranger on the bay horse, big man, scar on his face, sheriff watching him. It could be the same man. Probably was. The timing was too coincidental otherwise. But he hadn't approached, hadn't threatened, had simply watched and left when she'd made her position clear. That showed either respect or calculation, and she wasn't sure which concerned her more. Marigold turned from the window and began preparing for bed, checking the locks on the doors, ensuring the rifle was loaded and within reach. These were habits now, as automatic as breathing. But tonight, there was an edge to the routine, a sharpness that had been dulled by months of solitude. She lay in the narrow bed that had once been her parents', staring at the ceiling beams her father had hewn by hand. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild music. She wasn't afraid of coyotes. She wasn't afraid of work or weather or the disapproval of her neighbors. She'd faced death too many times to fear it, and life had already taken almost everything it could. But as sleep finally claimed her, she realized what did frighten her, the possibility that the stranger's appearance had awakened something she'd thought was dead. Not fear, but its opposite, a dangerous flicker of curiosity, maybe even hope. In her dreams, she stood again in the field hospital, but this time the wounded soldier whose hand she held had eyes the color of prairie storm clouds and a scar across his weathered face. He was trying to tell her something important, something vital, but she couldn't hear him over the sound of her own heart beating. She woke before dawn, as always, but for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel quite so complete. The smoke woke her before the crackling did. Marigold bolted upright, her lungs already protesting against the acrid air seeping through the walls. Orange light danced across her bedroom window, the wrong kind of light for the pre-dawn hour. She threw off the quilts and grabbed her boots, not bothering to lace them properly. The barn was on fire. She burst through the door into a wall of heat that made her eyes water. Flames licked up the eastern wall of the structure, feeding hungrily on the dry wood and last season's hay stored in the loft. The horses, God, the horses were screaming. Without thinking, she ran toward the inferno. The barn door was still closed, the iron handle already hot enough to blister. She wrapped her skirt around her hand and yanked it open, stumbling back as smoke billowed out. Easy, easy. She couldn't see through the black haze, but she could hear them, Buttercup and Jonas, her father's last two horses, wild with terror. She dropped to her knees where the air was marginally clearer and crawled forward, following the sound of their panic. A figure materialized from the smoke like something out of a nightmare. For a wild moment, she thought death had come for her at last, dressed in shadow and flame, then strong hands gripped her shoulders, hauling her backward. The horses! She fought against the grip, coughing violently. I'll get them. The voice was deep, roughened by smoke. Stay back. Before she could protest, he was gone, swallowed by the roiling darkness. She scrambled to her feet, torn between self-preservation and the need to help. Seconds stretched like hours. Then Buttercup burst from the barn, eyes rolling white, coat singed and steaming. Jonas followed, the stranger's shape barely visible as he drove the panicked animal forward with sharp slaps to its hindquarters. The man emerged last, bent double with coughing, in the hellish light of the fire. She could see him clearly for the first time, the same broad shoulders from yesterday, the same worn duster. And yes, there was the scar Pearl Hartley had mentioned, a pale line running from his left temple to his jaw. Water, she gasped. The pump! They worked without words, a desperate dance against time. She pumped while he filled bucket after bucket, his long strides eating up the distance between well and barn. It was hopeless, like trying to douse a bonfire with a thimble, but they fought anyway. Other figures appeared as if conjured by the smoke. The Hartleys, still in their night clothes. Thomas Brennan from 2 farms over. Even Sheriff Dawson, his badge glinting in the firelight. They formed a bucket brigade, but the fire had tasted freedom and wouldn't be denied. Let it go, the sheriff finally called out. Save the house. They shifted their efforts, soaking the ground between the barn and the main building, wetting down the roof and walls. Marigold's arms burned with exhaustion, her throat raw from smoke and exertion. Beside her, the stranger worked like a man possessed, never slowing, never speaking. By the time the sun crested the horizon, the barn was nothing but blackened timbers and smoldering ash. They stood in a ragged line, faces smeared with soot, clothes ruined, watching the last of the smoke rise into the morning sky. Well, Sheriff Dawson said finally, his voice flat with exhaustion. That's a hell of a thing. Marigold swayed on her feet, and immediately the stranger's hand was at her elbow, steadying her. She should have pulled away. Propriety demanded it, but she was too tired to care about propriety. The horses, she asked. scared but whole. Thomas Brennan reported, "Got them tethered by my wagon." Relief made her knees weak. She'd lost the barn, but the horses lived. In the arithmetic of frontier life, that counted as a victory. People began to drift away, promising to return later to help with the cleanup. Pearl Hartley pressed a basket of biscuits into Marigold's hands with uncharacteristic silence. Even Sheriff Dawson just tipped his hat and left without his usual pronouncements. Soon, only the stranger remained. They stood side by side, staring at the ruins, up close. She could see that his eyes were gray, not storm cloud gray like in her dream, but the color of river stones. The scar was old, well healed. His hands, she noticed, were badly blistered from handling the hot metal buckets. "Thank you," she said simply. He shrugged, a small movement that somehow conveyed volumes. Fire doesn't ask permission. Neither does help, apparently. That earned her a glance, and she thought she saw the ghost of a smile touch his mouth before he turned serious again. "You always sleep that light?" "When I'm alone, yes." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Fire started on the eastern wall. Wind was wrong for embers from your chimney." The implication settled over her like a cold shroud. "You think someone—" "I don't think anything, just saying what I saw." They lapsed into silence. She should send him away. A woman alone with a man who wasn't kin, the gossips would feast for weeks. But the social rules that govern normal life seemed absurd in the face of what had just happened. "I can rebuild it," he said suddenly. "The barn." She turned to look at him fully. "I don't even know your name." "Cole Maddox." The name meant nothing to her, which was somehow reassuring. "Marigold Reeves." "I know who you are." That stopped her short. "Do you now?" "Josiah Reeves's daughter, war nurse. Folks in town talk." "Folks in town talk too much." This time the smile was unmistakable, though fleeting. "That they do." She studied him, this man who'd risked his life for her horses without being asked. His clothes were ruined, his hands burned. Yet he stood there calmly discussing barn construction as if they were conducting business in the general store. "Why?" she asked finally. He understood the real question. "I was camped in the pines, saw the glow, would have come for anyone." "But you watched my place yesterday." No denial, just a straightforward nod. "Looking for work. Heard Josiah Reeves's daughter was running the place alone. Wanted to see if it was true." "And seems true enough." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the loss, the 100 worries crowding her mind, she almost laughed. "Mr. Maddox, you have a talent for understatement." "Cole," he corrected. "And you have a talent for not backing down. Saw that yesterday with the rifle." Heat that had nothing to do with the fire touched her cheeks. "A woman has to be careful." "A person has to be careful," he amended. "Man or woman, world's full of wolves." They turned back to the smoldering ruins. The sun was climbing higher, promising another hot day. She needed to salvage what she could, figure out where to shelter the horses, somehow find the money for rebuilding. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "You can't fight everything alone." The words were soft, almost lost in the whisper of wind through ash. She looked at him, this stranger who'd appeared from smoke and shadow, and saw something in his gray eyes she recognized. Not pity, she would have rejected pity immediately. It was understanding, the kind that came from carrying your own load of trouble. "I've been doing fine on my own," she said, though the smoldering ruins made the words ring hollow. "I can see that." No irony in his tone, just simple acknowledgement. "But a barn's a 2-person job at least. 3's better, and you'll need it before winter." He was right, and they both knew it. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with November only months away and 2 horses depending on her. "I can't pay much," she admitted. "Room, board, and whatever you can spare. I'm not looking to get rich." "What are you looking for, Mr.?" Cole. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just a place to work where folks don't ask too many questions. A warning, clearly. He was telling her there were things he wouldn't share, stories he wouldn't tell. In town, such reticence would mark him as suspicious. But Marigold had her own stories she didn't tell, her own memories locked away where even she tried not to visit them. Can you actually build a barn? Built 3 in Kansas before. He stopped abruptly. Before I came north. Before what? But she didn't ask. They all had befores they didn't discuss. All right, she said finally. There's a room off the kitchen, just storage now, but it has a bed. You can start today if... She gestured at his blistered hands. I've worked through worse. She believed him. Something about the way he held himself, the economical way he moved, spoke of a man who'd learned to endure. They spent the rest of the morning sorting through the wreckage. What few tools had survived were warped beyond use. The tack was ash, but the foundation stones were intact, which Cole said was good. They could build on what was already there. By noon, word had gotten around. A steady stream of neighbors arrived, some to help, others just to stare and speculate. Cole retreated to the edges whenever possible, letting Marigold handle the social negotiations. She noticed how he positioned himself always where he could see who was coming, never with his back exposed for long. Martha Hennessy from the general store brought lunch and a generous helping of gossip. That's him, she whispered, nodding toward Cole. The one I told Pearl about. Sheriff Dawson's been asking around. No one knows where he came from. Kansas, Marigold said mildly, taking a certain pleasure in Martha's frustrated expression. Well, I hope you know what you're doing, dear, taking in a stranger, especially after... She gestured meaningfully at the ruins. The implication sparked anger in Marigold's chest. Are you suggesting Mr. Maddox had something to do with this? I'm not suggesting anything. Martha's tone suggested otherwise. Just saying it's curious timing. What's curious, Marigold said with deliberate calm, is how a fire starts on a windless night on the side of the barn farthest from the house. What's curious is how it burned so fast, like someone helped it along. Martha's eyes widened. Surely you don't think... I don't think anything. Just saying what's curious. After Martha left, flustered and full of new gossip to spread, Marigold found Cole by the well, wrapping his blistered hands with strips torn from his ruined shirt. Let me... she said, taking the fabric from him. He held still while she worked, his hands rough and scarred even before the burns. Working hands. Honest hands, her father would have said, though she wondered if he'd have thought the same about the rest of the man. They think I did it, he said quietly. They think a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Could cause you trouble, having me here. She tied off the bandage, maybe a little sharper than necessary. Mr. Maddox Cole. Someone burned my barn last night. Maybe because I'm a woman alone. Maybe for other reasons. But I know it wasn't the man who risked his life saving my horses. He flexed his fingers, testing the bandages. You trust too easy? No, she corrected. I trust just enough. Their eyes met and held for a moment that stretched like taffy. Then he nodded, picked up the salvaged hammer, and went back to work. As the afternoon wore on, Marigold found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, the way he measured twice before making any cut, the way he organized the salvageable materials with almost military precision, the way he managed to avoid most direct interactions with the neighbors while still being unfailingly polite when cornered. When the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, most of the helpers had gone home. Cole stood surveying their progress, not much in terms of rebuilding, but they'd cleared the site and salvaged what they could. We'll need lumber, he said. Nails. More than what's at the general store. There's a sawmill about a day's ride north. Mr. Peterson runs it. He knew my father. Cole nodded. I can make the trip if you trust me with a wagon. Trust again. It seemed to be the currency of their strange new partnership. "We'll go together," she decided. "I need to negotiate the price anyway." He looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "Your farm." "Yes," she agreed. "It is." As they headed toward the house, she felt the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones, but underneath it was something else, a spark of energy she hadn't felt in months. Purpose, maybe, or just the relief of not facing everything alone. "Cole," she said as they reached the porch, "why were you really watching my place yesterday?" He paused with one foot on the step. In the dying light, the scar on his face looked like a crack in marble. "Because," he said finally, "I recognize something." "What?" "Someone else who knows what it's like to have everything burned down and keep standing anyway." Before she could respond, he'd gone inside, leaving her alone with the gathering darkness and the smell of ash on the wind. In the distance, a coyote howled, but tonight it sounded less like loneliness and more like defiance. She looked back at where the barn had stood that morning. Now just a scar on the earth. Tomorrow they'd start rebuilding. Tomorrow she'd have help. Strange as that help might be, for tonight it was enough. The fence posts stood like crooked teeth against the prairie sky. Marigold wrapped another length of wire around the weathered wood, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the leather gloves that made her fingers clumsy. Beside her, Cole worked in his usual silence, driving posts into the hard-packed earth with steady, powerful swings. They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past 2 weeks. Coffee at dawn, work until the heat became unbearable, a brief respite during the worst of the afternoon, then back to it until darkness forced them to stop. The barn foundation was cleared and ready, lumber ordered from Peterson's mill, while they waited for delivery. There were a dozen other tasks that had been neglected during her months of solitary struggle. "This section's rotted through," Cole said, testing another post with his boot. It crumbled at the pressure. "Half the fence is rotted through," Marigold replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. "Father kept meaning to replace it, but—" She didn't finish. They both knew how stories like that ended out here. Cole studied the fence line stretching toward the horizon. "We could move it in closer, give you less perimeter to maintain, and less pasture for grazing." "True." He pulled the ruined post from the ground with surprising ease. "But a smaller plot you can manage is worth more than a larger one you can't." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him in days. Cole Maddox parceled out words like a miser with gold coins, spending them only when necessary. She'd grown used to it, even found it restful after years of neighbors who filled silence with meaningless chatter. "We'll see how much lumber we can afford after the barn," she said. "Maybe do sections at a time." He nodded and went back to work. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a shimmering furnace. Sweat soaked through Marigold's dress, making the fabric cling uncomfortably. She caught Cole glancing at her, then quickly away, and felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. There had been more such moments lately. A brush of hands when passing tools, eyes meeting across the supper table, the careful dance of two people sharing close quarters, trying to maintain propriety's boundaries in a situation that made those boundaries increasingly absurd. "Storm coming," Cole said, pointing to the western horizon where clouds piled like dark cotton. Marigold squinted at the sky. "Tonight, maybe, we should finish this section. We should secure the animals." She wanted to argue, to push through and complete the task, but she'd learned Cole's weather instincts were sharp. In the war, she'd known soldiers who could smell rain hours before it arrived, feel battles in their bones before the first shot was fired. Cole had that same uncanny awareness. They worked quickly to move the horses into the shed that served as a temporary stable, then battened down everything that might blow away. The wind picked up as they finished, carrying the green copper smell of approaching rain. "Inside," Cole said as the first fat drops began to fall. They ran for the house, making it to the porch just as the sky opened. Rain came down in sheets, turning the yard into instant mud. Lightning cracked across the prairie, followed by thunder that shook the windows. Marigold stood at the door, watching nature's violence with the appreciation of someone who'd survived worse. At least it'll settle the dust. And turn the roads to soup, Cole added, moving to stand beside her. Peterson's delivery might be delayed. She could feel the heat of him, smell the honest sweat of hard work mixed with something else leather, maybe, or the mysterious scent that was simply male. It had been so long since she'd stood this close to a man by choice rather than necessity. Marigold. Her name on his lips was soft, almost lost in the thunder. She turned to find him watching her with those stone-gray eyes. Something shifted in the space between them, subtle as a change in wind direction, but just as unmistakable. "We should," she began, not sure how to finish. "Get dry," he said, stepping back. "I'll start a fire." The moment shattered like glass. She retreated to her room to change into dry clothes, her hands shaking slightly as she unbuttoned the soaked dress. What had almost happened? What did she want to happen? When she returned to the kitchen, Cole had a fire crackling in the stove and coffee brewing. He'd changed too, into a clean shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders when he moved. She forced herself to look away, busying herself with preparing supper. They ate in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. The house felt smaller with the rain closing them in, more intimate. Every clink of fork against plate seemed loud as gunshot. "Tell me about Kansas," she said finally, desperate for distraction. His hand stilled. "Not much to tell. You said you built barns there." "I did." She waited, but he offered nothing more. "Cole, we're going to be working together for months, maybe longer. Can't you give me something? Anything." He set down his fork carefully. "What do you want to know? Did you have a farm, a family?" "Had a brother." The words came reluctantly. Sam. He was younger, smarter. Should have been a teacher or a lawyer, but he followed me west instead." The past tense hung between them like a funeral shroud. Marigold knew better than to push, but Cole surprised her by continuing. "We had a small place, nothing fancy. Raised horses, did some farming, built barns for extra money." His eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the kitchen walls. Sam was good at it, had an eye for design, how to make things last. "What happened?" "He died. Flat, final, a door slamming shut." But Marigold had tended too many dying men to be deterred by closed doors. "How?" Cole's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" She considered her answer carefully. "Because you're living in my house, working my land, and because—" She met his eyes. "Because I think it still hurts you, and hurts have a way of festering if they're not cleaned out." Speaking from experience. "Yes." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both flinch. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. "They said he stole a horse," Cole said suddenly. "Sam, they said he stole a horse from Judge Morrison's stable. Found him with it, brought him in. Quick trial, quicker verdict." Marigold's stomach turned. She knew where this story led. But he didn't steal it. Sam wouldn't steal water if he was dying of thirst. Someone put that horse in our barn, someone who wanted our land, maybe, or had a grudge. Doesn't matter now. His hands clenched and unclenched. "I was away, delivering lumber. Got back in time to see—" He stopped. She reached across the table without thinking, covering one of his clenched fists with her hand. "Cole, they wouldn't even let me cut him down. Sheriff said it had to stay till sundown, as a warning." His voice was rough as burlap. "I waited. Then I buried him. Then I left." But if he was innocent, innocent doesn't matter when the judge's son is the one who really took that horse and needs someone else to blame. Bitterness bled through the words. "I went to the federal marshals, tried to get someone to listen. All I got was a target on my back." Now she understood the watching, the wariness, the way he always kept his back to a wall. "They're still looking for you." "Probably. Man who asks too many questions about a judge's family doesn't tend to live long." He turned his hand under hers, palm up, and she should have pulled away, but didn't. 7 years I've been drifting. 7 years of looking over my shoulder. "Why come here?" Heard Nebraska didn't ask too many questions. Heard there was work. His thumb moved against her palm, possibly without his awareness. Didn't expect... What? You. Simple, honest, terrifying. The rain had softened to a steady patter. The kitchen was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Marigold was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, palm to palm. The brush of fingertips, the heat that had nothing to do with the stove. "This is complicated," she said softly. "Everything's complicated." His eyes held hers. "Doesn't mean it's wrong." She thought of all the reasons it was wrong. The impropriety, the danger, the fact that she'd sworn never to depend on anyone again after Thomas died and left her alone with a farm she didn't know how to run and dreams that turned to ash. But she also thought of the loneliness, vast as the prairie itself, the nights when the silence pressed in like a physical weight, the way her heart had lifted when she'd seen Cole ride out of the smoke that morning, alive and whole. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They sat like that while the storm spent itself, hands clasped across the scarred wooden table. Neither spoke. Neither moved to do more, but something fundamental had shifted, like the earth settling after rain. Finally, reluctantly, she pulled her hand back. We should both get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "Lock your door." "I always do." "Good." He stood, then paused. "Marigold, what I told you about Sam, about Kansas, stays between us," she finished. "You have my word." Something passed over his face, relief, gratitude, maybe trust. "Sleep well." After he'd gone to his small room off the kitchen, Marigold banked the fire and prepared for bed. The rain had tapered to a drizzle, pattering against the windows like gentle fingers. She thought about Cole's story, about the brother who should have been a teacher, about 7 years of running. In her own room, she pulled out the journal she'd kept during the war and hadn't opened since. The pages were yellowed, filled with her cramped handwriting, lists of supplies, names of the dead, fragments of prayers and curses and everything in between. She turned to a blank page and wrote, * Cole Maddox arrived with the fire. I don't know if he's salvation or damnation, but I'm too tired of being alone to care. Perhaps that's what the preachers mean by temptation, not the thing itself, but the exhaustion that makes you stop fighting it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, moving east. Tomorrow would dawn clear and hot, perfect for work. They'd repair more fence, haul water, prepare for the lumber delivery. Simple tasks made complex by the new awareness between them. She closed the journal and blew out the lamp. In the darkness, she could hear the soft sounds of Cole moving in his room, the creak of his bed as he settled. Strange to have another heartbeat under her roof. Stranger still to find it comforting rather than threatening. The last thing she thought before sleep took her was how his hand had felt under hers, rough and warm and real, like a promise of something she didn't yet have words for. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving the earth clean and ready for whatever came next. The prairie held its breath, waiting, and in the small house that Josiah Reeves had built with hope and stubbornness, 2 damaged people slept on either side of a thin wall, dreaming of things they weren't yet ready to name. The federal marshal's badge caught the afternoon sun like a warning. Marigold stood in her doorway, one hand resting on the frame, studying the man who'd introduced himself as Deputy Marshal William Carver. He was younger than she'd expected, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing and a mustache waxed to perfection despite the prairie dust. "I'm looking for a man," Carver said, producing a folded paper from his coat. Goes by several names, but he'd be about 35, over 6 feet, likely has a scar on his face. Marigold kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. That describes half the men in the territory. Marshall. This one would have arrived recently, within the last month. He unfolded the paper, a wanted poster. The sketch was rough but recognizable enough. Cole Maddox, wanted for questioning in the death of Judge Morrison's son in Kansas. He's dangerous, ma'am. Killed a man in cold blood, then fled justice. Is that so? She didn't reach for the poster, though Carver held it out expectantly. There's a reward, $500 for information leading to his capture. $500. Enough to rebuild the barn and fix the fences and still have money left for winter supplies. Enough to secure her future on the farm without depending on anyone. I haven't seen anyone matching that description, she said evenly. Carver's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked past her into the house, then at the construction site where the new barn skeleton was beginning to rise. You're running this place alone. I am. Must be difficult. A woman alone, trying to maintain a farm this size. His tone was sympathetic, but something underneath made her skin crawl. Especially after the fire. Heard about that in town. Suspicious timing. Fires happen. They do. He tucked the poster back into his coat. Still, must be tempting to accept help from any willing hand. Sometimes we don't ask enough questions when we're desperate. Heat flared in her chest. Marshall Carver, I've been running this farm since my father died. Before that, I spent 4 years piecing men back together in field hospitals. I've seen enough of humanity to know how to judge character. No offense intended, ma'am. But his smile said otherwise. Just concerned for your welfare. This man, the one I'm looking for, he's skilled at deception. Might present himself as helpful, trustworthy. Might even have a convincing story about being wrongly accused. Most criminals do, I imagine. Indeed. He glanced around once more. Mind if I water my horse before I go? She couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. Well's around back. She watched from the kitchen window as Carver led his horse to the pump. He took his time, eyes scanning the property, noting details, the new lumber stacked under canvas, the tools arranged just so, the small things that spoke of 2 people's work rather than one. When he returned, she was waiting on the porch. Find everything you need. Yes, thank you. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. I'll be staying in town for a few days. The hotel, if you remember anything that might be helpful. He touched his hat brim. Good day, Miss Reeves. Mrs. Reeves, she corrected, though the title felt strange on her tongue after so long. Of course. My apologies. But his smile suggested he knew exactly how long she'd been widowed. She waited until his dust had settled before going inside. Her hands shook as she poured coffee, slopping some onto the table. $500. Blood money, her conscience whispered. But the practical part of her brain calculated everything that money could buy. Cole appeared at sundown, materializing from the direction of the creek where he'd been working on the irrigation channels. He took one look at her face and stilled. What happened? She told him about Carver, watching his expression close off with each word. When she finished, he simply nodded. I'll be gone by morning. No. The word surprised them both. Cole had been halfway to his room. Now he turned back, frowning. Marigold. Did you kill Judge Morrison's son? His jaw tightened. No. Did you kill anyone in Kansas? No. He paused. Not in Kansas. She let that sit, understanding there were stories he hadn't told yet. Then you're not going anywhere. We have a barn to finish. You don't understand. Carver won't give up. They never do. He moved closer, intensity radiating from him. He'll watch. He'll wait. He'll make your life difficult until you give him what he wants. Let him watch. She lifted her chin. I've nothing to hide. You're hiding me. I'm employing a farmhand named Cole Maddox, who's good with horses and doesn't waste words. That's all anyone needs to know." He made a frustrated sound. "The reward?" "Blood money." $500 isn't blood money. It's survival money. Security money. His hands clenched at his sides. "It's more than I'm worth." The defeat in his voice made her angry. She stood, closing the distance between them until she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. Don't you dare decide what you're worth to me." Something flared in his expression, surprise, maybe hope. "Marigold!" "I told you about Thomas, my husband. Did I tell you he was sick when I married him, lung fever? Everyone knew he wouldn't last the year. But I was 18 and stubborn and thought I could save him." She laughed bitterly. "I couldn't. All my nursing, all my knowledge, worthless. He died anyway, left me with 40 acres and no idea how to work them." Cole stayed silent, but his eyes never left her face. "My father came back from his brother's place in Illinois to help. Taught me everything he knew, then worked himself into the ground trying to make up for lost time. Another man I couldn't save." Her voice cracked. "So don't talk to me about worth. Don't tell me $500 matters more than—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "More than what?" His voice was rough. "More than having someone here who doesn't look at me with pity, who doesn't tell me what I can't do, who just works beside me like I'm capable." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to step back. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You're the most capable person I've ever met." "Then stay." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Please." For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The air between them crackled with possibility. Then voices carried from the road neighbors passing by. Heading home from town, and the spell broke. Cole stepped back, his hand dropping. "I'll bring trouble. I've had trouble. I survived." "This is different." "Everything's different until it isn't." She forced steadiness into her voice. "Marshall Carver can watch all he wants. He'll see a widow and her hired hand working a farm. Nothing more." Cole studied her for a long moment. "You're taking a terrible risk. My risk to take. And if you're wrong, if they arrest you for harboring a fugitive, then I'll trust the truth to matter eventually." She saw his skeptical expression and added, I know it doesn't always, but what's the alternative? Live in fear. Let them drive off the first person in years who's made me feel." She bit off the words, heat flooding her cheeks. "Feel what?" he asked softly. But she'd already revealed too much. "Supper's getting cold." They ate in tense silence, the weight of unfinished conversations pressing down. Afterward, Cole insisted on checking the perimeter, looking for signs of surveillance. Marigold cleaned up, trying not to think about how empty the house would feel if he left. When he returned, she was sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. He stopped in the doorway, watching her. "My mother used to do that," he said quietly. "Sit by the fire and mend things. Said it was soothing." "It is." She didn't look up. "Fixing something that's torn, making it useful again." He crossed to sit in the other chair, the one that had been her father's. They sat in companionable quiet, the only sounds the pop of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. "If I stay," he said eventually, "we need rules, boundaries." "Such as?" "I sleep in the barn once it's built. We keep distance between us and public. No one can have reason to gossip beyond what they already do." Each word was a small cut. "And in private?" A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. "In private, we remember that I'm a wanted man who'll bring you nothing but trouble." "I'll remember," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. Later, as she prepared for bed, she heard him moving around outside, checking windows, securing doors, protecting her, even as he planned for distance. The contradiction should have frustrated her. Instead, it only made her more certain. She pulled out her journal and wrote by lamplight. Marshall Carver came today. Handsome in that cold way some lawmen have, like they've forgotten people are more than problems to solve. He offered 30 pieces of silver for Cole. I told him I hadn't seen anyone. I'm not naive. I know Cole has secrets beyond what he's shared. I know this could end badly. But when I think of him leaving, something in my chest feels like it's tearing. Perhaps this is what the poets mean by fate, not grand destiny, but small choices that feel inevitable. He could have ridden past the night of the fire. I could have sent him away after. He could leave tonight, and I could take the marshal's money. But we won't. We're both too stubborn or too lonely or too something to make the sensible choice. God help us both. She closed the journal and blew out the lamp. Through her window, she could see a figure standing guard in the darkness, watching, waiting, protecting what he claimed he had no right to protect. Tomorrow, Marshall Carver would likely return. The neighbors would whisper. The work would continue, and two people would pretend that something wasn't building between them as steady and inevitable as the barn rising from the ashes. But tonight, knowing he was out there, knowing he'd chosen to stay despite the danger tonight, that was enough. Spring arrived like a tentative visitor, unsure of its welcome. The last frost melted from the fence posts, and the earth softened enough to work. Marigold stood in the doorway of the newly completed barn, breathing in the smell of fresh lumber and possibility. "Ready?" Cole asked from behind her, holding 2 buckets of seed corn. She nodded, trying not to notice how the morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair. The past months had aged him in small ways, new lines around his eyes from squinting against winter wind, a slight stoop to his shoulders from constant vigilance. Marshall Carver had left town in February, but they both knew he could return at any time. They walked to the south field together, their shadows long on the awakening ground. This ritual of planting felt different from past years. Her father had made it feel like duty. Doing it alone had felt like desperation, but with Cole beside her, it felt like hope. "My mother used to say planting was an act of faith," Cole said, kneeling to test the soil. "Trust that the rain will come, the sun will shine, the seeds will remember what they're supposed to do." Was she a farmer? "Teacher, actually, but she kept a garden, said it helped her remember that knowledge needed tending too." He smiled at the memory, a rare, unguarded expression. Sam got that from her, the teaching part. Marigold had learned to treasure these glimpses of his past, parceled out like precious coins. She knew his mother had died when he was 15, his father earlier, in a railroad accident. Sam had been all the family he had left. They worked in companionable rhythm. Cole making furrows with a hoe while Marigold followed, dropping seeds with practiced precision. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs. When they stopped to rest, Cole pulled out his canteen and offered it to her first. She drank, then watched him tip his head back for his own drink, throat working. After months of careful distance, she still felt that pull, strong as undertow. They'd kept to his rules in public, maintaining the fiction of employer and hired hand. But in private moments like this, the pretense wore thin. "You're staring," he said without opening his eyes. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Just thinking." Dangerous habit. "So you keep telling me." He opened his eyes then, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Marigold." "I know," she said quickly. "I know all the reasons why not. You've listed them often enough." "Because they haven't changed." "Neither have my feelings." The words hung between them like laundry on a line, impossible to take back. Cole's expression cycled through surprise, longing, and finally settled on that careful neutrality he wore like armor. "We should finish the planting," he said. But as he stood, she caught his sleeve. "Wait!" He stilled, not pulling away but not moving closer either. "I need to show you something," she said. "Tonight, after supper. Will you come?" A muscle worked in his jaw. "Where?" "Just trust me." She saw the war in his eyes, caution against curiosity. Rules against whatever it was that kept him here despite the danger. Finally. He nodded. They finished planting as the afternoon wore on, but the ease between them had shifted into something charged with anticipation. At supper, they barely spoke, the clink of forks against plates loud in the silence. When full dark had fallen, Marigold lit a lantern and led him to her bedroom. He stopped at the threshold like there was an invisible wall. "Marigold." "Just come in, please." He entered reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable in this intimate space. She knelt by the bed and pulled out a wooden box, hands trembling slightly as she opened it. "My father gave me this before he died," she said, pulling out a leather journal, thicker than the one she currently used. "It's from the war." She opened it carefully, pages crackling with age. Her younger self's handwriting sprawled across the pages, sometimes neat, sometimes barely legible. "May 15th, 1,863 inches, she read. 16 amputations today. Ran out of laudanum after the 5th. The men were brave, braver than I could be. Private Morrison from Ohio held my hand as doctor. Kellner took his leg, told me about his girl back home, how he planned to marry her if he lived. I lied and said he would. We both knew better." Cole had moved closer, drawn despite himself. Sherry flipped pages. "July 3rd, 1863. The earth shakes with cannon fire. They're bringing them in by the wagon load. Not enough hands, not enough supplies, not enough of anything except blood and screaming. A Confederate boy. Couldn't be more than 15. Died calling for his mother. I held him and pretended to be her. What else could I do?" "Why are you showing me this?" His voice was rough. "Because you think you're the only one with ghosts. The only one who's seen the worst of what people can do." She looked up at him. "After the war, I thought I was broken. Thought I'd seen too much to ever live a normal life. Thomas knew. He married me anyway. Said the broken places were where the light got in." "He sounds like a good man." "He was, but he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't broken, just changed, made different by what I'd witnessed." She stood, still clutching the journal. "Just like you." Cole's hand rose as if to touch her cheek, then dropped. "It's not the same." "Isn't it you lost your brother to injustice? I lost hundreds of brothers, sons, husbands, to war. You carry guilt for not being there. I carry guilt for not saving more." She set the journal aside. "We're both walking wounded. Cole, pretending otherwise doesn't heal anything." "What do you want from me?" The question came out raw, almost desperate. "The truth, not about Kansas or Marshalls or any of that. The truth about why you stay when every instinct must tell you to run." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, the words seemed pulled from some deep place. "That first night, watching your place. I wasn't looking for work. I was planning to rob you." The confession should have frightened her. Instead, she felt only curiosity. "What changed?" "I watched you working alone. Saw how you moved like you were carrying invisible weight. Recognized it." He laughed bitterly. "Then the fire happened. And instead of taking advantage of the chaos, I was running into the flames. Still don't understand why." "I do." He looked at her sharply. "Because you're not the man circumstances tried to make you. You're the man who saved my horses, who works beside me without making me feel weak, who stands guard at night even though I never asked." She stepped closer. "You're the man who makes me feel safe for the first time since—" Her voice broke. Cole caught her as her knees buckled, guided her to sit on the bed. She wasn't crying. Tears had been trained out of her during the war, but something inside was cracking open. "Since," he prompted gently. "Since I was 23, Holding dying boys in a tent that stank of gangrene and defeat, I learned to be strong because I had to be. Learned to be alone because it was safer than depending on someone who might not come back. She looked up at him. Then you arrived, and for the first time in years, I didn't want to be alone anymore. Cole knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I can't stay forever, you know that. I'm not asking for forever, I'm asking for now. For honest work and quiet evenings and the chance to not be alone. Is that so terrible? No, he said softly. It's the least terrible thing I've ever been offered. She freed one hand to touch his face, tracing the scar with the gentle fingers. Then stop fighting it. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. I don't know how. Like planting seeds, she whispered. An act of faith. Trust that the rain will come, the sun will shine, and we'll remember what we're supposed to do. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Then, slowly, carefully, as if she might shatter, he kissed her palm. It was barely a touch, but it sent lightning through her entire body. Marigold. He breathed against her skin. I'm no good at faith. Then I'll have enough for both of us. They stayed like that, him kneeling before her, her hand cradled in his, while the lantern burned low. No more words were needed. They'd planted something today, more than corn in willing earth. Whether it would grow remained to be seen. But for now, the planting was enough. When he finally rose to leave, she caught his hand once more. The journal. Take it. Read it if you want. Maybe it'll help you understand. He accepted the leather-bound book with the reverence due a sacred text. At the door, he paused. Marigold, what you said about the broken places letting light in. Yes, I'm starting to see it, the light. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying lantern and the strange sensation of hope taking root in ground she'd thought too hard for growing anything but regret. Outside, spring peepers began their evening chorus, singing of renewal and possibility. Marigold listened to them through her window, wondering if Cole was listening too, if he was reading her words and understanding finally that some wounds could be shared, some burdens lifted by willing hands. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The seeds would need water and sun and time. Marshall Carver might return. The neighbors would gossip. The work would never end. But tonight, she'd shown him her scars and he hadn't turned away. He'd offered his own truth in return, and in the space between them, something fragile and precious had begun to grow. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The church hall blazed with lantern light and laughter. Bunting in green and white hung from the rafters, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted meat made even the simplest farmer feel rich for a night. The spring festival had drawn everyone from miles around a chance to celebrate surviving another winter and the promise of new growth. Marigold stood near the refreshment table, wearing her best dress, not the red earth color she'd imagined in quiet moments, but a deep blue that had been her mother's. Pearl Hartley had insisted on helping with her hair, pinning it up in a style that made her neck feel exposed and strange. You look lovely, dear, Pearl said, admiring her handiwork. Though I still say you should have worn the green. It would bring out your eyes. Marigold murmured something non-committal, her attention drawn to the door where Cole had just entered. He'd cleaned up well, fresh-shaved, wearing a crisp white shirt she'd never seen before. His hair was still damp from washing, combed back to reveal the strong lines of his face. When he spotted her across the room, something flickered in his gray eyes before he carefully looked away. They'd maintained their distance all week, preparing for this public appearance. In town, she was Mrs. Reeves, the widow managing her father's farm. He was her hired hand. Nothing more. The careful charade chafed like ill-fitting shoes, but they both understood its necessity. Oh, look! Martha Hennessy appeared at Marigold's elbow, voice pitched to carry. Your man made it after all. I wondered if he'd show. Mr. Maddox isn't my man. Martha, He works the farm. Of course. Martha's smile said she believed otherwise. Still, nice that he came. These events are good for community building. The fiddle player struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming for the first dance. Marigold watched Cole position himself near the wall, close enough to the door for quick exit if needed. Sheriff Dawson stood across the room, watching him with casual interest that fooled no one. Mrs. Reeves." A smooth voice at her shoulder made her turn. Robert Thornton stood there, hat in hand, smiling with too many teeth. "Might I have this dance?" She knew Robert by reputation owned the largest spread in the county, had buried 2 wives already, and was known for his wandering hands at social gatherings. Refusing would cause talk, but accepting felt like betrayal. "I'm not much for dancing, Mr. Thornton." "Nonsense. A beautiful woman like you should be on the floor, not hiding by the pie table." He reached for her hand. "The lady said she doesn't care to dance." Cole's voice was quiet, but carried steel underneath. He'd crossed the room without her noticing, now stood slightly behind her left shoulder, not touching, carefully proper, but undeniably present. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe I was addressing you, hired man." "No," Cole agreed mildly. "You were bothering Mrs. Reeves. She was being polite about it." The music faltered as people noticed the tension. Marigold felt every eye in the room turn their way. "Cole," she said quietly, "it's fine." But Thornton had already puffed up like a rooster. "You forget your place, boy. Hired hands don't interfere with their betters." "My place," Cole said, still in that dangerously mild tone, "is wherever Mrs. Reeves needs me to be, right now. That seems to be between her and you." Sheriff Dawson started across the room, hand resting on his pistol. Marigold's heart raced. This was how it could all unravel, one moment of protective instinct, exposing everything they'd been careful to hide. Mr. Thornton," she said quickly, stepping forward. "I appreciate the invitation, truly, but I promised my first dance to Mr. Maddox. He's been practicing all week." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Cole's expression didn't change, but she felt his surprise like a physical thing. Thornton's face darkened. "You dance with a drifter over me?" "I dance with a man who's earned my respect through honest work." "Yes." She kept her voice level, aware of their audience. "If you'll excuse us," she turned to Cole, meeting his eyes steadily. "Mr. Maddox." For a heartbeat, she thought he might refuse, might maintain the careful distance they'd promised. Then he offered his arm with grave formality. "Mrs. Reeves." The crowd parted as they moved to the dance floor. The fiddle player, after a moment's hesitation, struck up a waltz. Not the lively reel that had been playing, but something slower, more intimate. Cole's hand settled at her waist, proper and light. She placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension there. They stood at perfect social distance. Nothing improper, but Marigold was acutely aware of every point of contact. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured as they began to move. "Thornton's a bully. Someone needed to stand up to him." "That's not what I meant." She knew, by claiming him publicly, even for something as innocent as a dance. She'd shifted their relationship in the town's eyes. There would be consequences. "I don't care," she said. "You should." "Cole." She waited until he met her eyes. "Go deeper. Don't hold back." The words from her imagination made real scent color to his cheeks. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "You don't know what you're asking." "Don't I?" They turned, and she caught sight of their reflection in the window, a woman in blue and a man in white, moving together like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Around them, other couples had joined the floor, but Marigold felt suspended in a bubble of their own making. "People are watching," Cole said. "Let them." The sheriff. Is eating pie and flirting with the baker's daughter? Look. He did, and his shoulders relaxed slightly. This is still dangerous. Everything worth doing is... His thumb moved against her back, possibly without his awareness, a tiny caress that sent shivers down her spine. You sound like Sam. He used to say things like that. Tell me about him. Not the end. Tell me about before. As they danced, Cole began to speak in low tones only she could hear, about Sam's laugh that could fill a room, his terrible cooking but insistence on trying anyway, the way he could gentle any horse, talk anyone into anything, how he'd stayed up all night once, helping a neighbor's cow through a difficult birth, then walked 5 miles to school because he had a test. He would have liked you, Cole said finally. Would have said you were too smart for me, but he'd have liked you. I would have liked him too. The music was ending. Around them, couples were separating, but Cole seemed frozen, unwilling or unable to let go. One more, Marigold said softly. Please. He nodded, and when the next song began another waltz, God bless the fiddle player, they moved together again. This time, the careful distance had decreased. Nothing scandalous, but close enough that she could feel his breathing, smell the soap he'd used, and something underneath that was purely him. After this, we go back to how it was, he said. Employer and hired hand. Nothing more. If that's what you want. It's what's safe. Safe, she repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. I was safe for years, safe and alone and slowly dying inside. Is that really what you want from me? I want you alive and free and not arrested for harboring a fugitive. And I want one night where we don't pretend. One night where we're just two people who... She stopped, unable to voice what they were to each other. Who what? His voice was rough. You know, say it. The challenge in his tone sparked something in her. Two people who care about each other, who've built something together, who fit together like puzzle pieces, he finished softly. Sam used to say that about folks. Some people just fit. The music ended, and this time they had to separate. The spell was broken by Martha Hennessy's tittering laugh and Robert Thornton's glowering from the corner. Reality rushed back the watching eyes, the careful boundaries, the danger that lurked beneath every moment. But as Cole walked her back to the refreshment table, his hand at her elbow proper but protective, Marigold felt no regret. For 2 songs, they'd been themselves. Not widow and hired hand, not woman with too much past and man with too many secrets, but simply Marigold and Cole, moving together in time to music. Thank you, she said quietly as he prepared to retreat to his wall. For what? For not holding back. A smile ghosted across his features there and gone like summer lightning. Didn't know I had a choice, not with you. He left her there, returning to his careful distance. But something had shifted. She felt it in the way people looked at them now, calculating and curious. Felt it in the warm place where his hand had rested. Felt it in the way her heart beat a rhythm that might have been music or might have been his name. The festival continued around her laughter and gossip and the ordinary joy of community. But Marigold stood apart from it all, holding the memory of 2 dances like a secret treasure. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The pretense would resume. The danger would remain. But tonight, she danced with Cole Maddox in front of God and everyone, and the world hadn't ended. If anything, it had finally begun. The rumors started small, like sparks in dry grass, a whispered conversation after church, a knowing look at the general store. By the time the corn was knee-high, the whole county was talking about the widow Reeves and her hired man. Marigold felt the weight of their judgment every time she went to town. The way conversations stopped when she entered the mercantile. The way married women pulled their husbands a little closer when she passed. She held her head high and conducted her business, but each trip left her feeling raw. It was after one such visit that she found Cole in the barn, mending harnesses with violent efficiency. What happened? she asked, setting down her packages. Nothing. He didn't look up. Cole. His hands stilled on the leather. Thornton was in town. Had plenty to say about you, about us. Heat flared in her chest, anger mixed with something else. What kind of things? The kind of things that get women shunned and men shot. His voice was flat, controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Let him talk. Everyone knows what he is. Do they? Cole finally looked at her. Eyes storm dark. Or do they know what he tells them, rich man with land and influence? Or a widow who dances too close with her hired help? The accusation stung because it held truth. We danced, that's all. That's not all, and you know it. He stood abruptly, the harness falling, forgotten. Every time you look at me, everyone can see it. Every time He cut himself off, jaw clenched. Every time you what? Nothing. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Cole, talk to me. There's nothing to say. He moved to leave, but she stepped into his path. Don't do this. Don't shut me out because Robert Thornton is spreading gossip. It's not just gossip anymore. The words came out hard, bitter. He's been talking to Sheriff Dawson, asking questions about where I came from, how long I plan to stay, making suggestions about why you really keep me around. The implications made her stomach turn. He wouldn't dare. He would. He has. Cole's hands clenched at his sides. He wants this land. Marigold always has. Your father knew it, kept him at bay. But now I'm just a woman alone who needs a man's protection. The sarcasm tasted sharp on her tongue. In his mind, yes. They stood close in the filtered barn light, dust motes dancing between them. Marigold could smell hay and leather and that particular scent that was coal cedar and smoke and something wild. Is that what you think too? She asked quietly. That I need protection? I think, he said slowly, that you're the strongest person I know. And I think that makes you a target for men like Thornton, who can't stand strength they can't control. The unexpected understanding made her throat tight. She reached out, fingertips barely brushing his sleeve. So what do? We stop this. The words fell like stones. Whatever this is between us, we end it. I work your land until harvest. Then I move on. You find someone respectable to marry, someone who... Stop! The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare tell me who to marry. Don't you dare plan my life for me. Someone has to... You won't see the danger. I see it fine. I just refuse to let it rule me. Even if it costs you everything. What's everything? This land, its dirt and grass. The good opinion of neighbors who whisper behind their hands. They've been doing that since I came back from the war. She stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. The only thing I have worth losing is... The barn door slammed open. They jumped apart as sunlight flooded in, revealing a figure that made Marigold's blood run cold. James Morrison stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of handsomeness that had once made her young heart flutter. Before the war, before she'd learned what lay beneath that polished surface. Marigold. He removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. You're looking well. James. She kept her voice level despite the way her skin crawled. You're a long way from Chicago. Not so far. I have business interests in the territory now. His gaze shifted to Cole, and his smile sharpened. You must be the hired man I've heard so much about. Cole said nothing, but Marigold saw his stance shift subtly, weight-balanced, ready to move. He'd recognized a threat, even if he didn't understand its nature. What do you want? She asked bluntly. Direct as always. James stepped into the barn, and she fought the urge to retreat. I heard you were widowed. I came to pay my respects, and to make you an offer. I'm not interested in any offer from you. You haven't heard it yet. He moved closer, and this time she did step back, only to find Cole had somehow positioned himself slightly in front of her. James's eyes narrowed at the protective gesture. "The offer," he continued, "is simple. Marry me, as you should have years ago, and I'll ensure your current difficulties disappear. Thornton will back off. The rumors will stop. Your farm will prosper under my protection." I said no 12 years ago. The answer hasn't changed. 12 years ago, you were a foolish girl who thought she was too good for me. Ran off to play nurse rather than fulfill your promise. His veneer of civility was cracking. Now you're a widow with a ruined reputation, harboring questionable men. I'd say your circumstances have changed considerably. "Get out." Cole's voice was quiet, dangerous. James's attention shifted fully to him. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Don't need introduction to recognize garbage that needs removing." The insult hung in the air. James's face flushed dark red. "You dare!" "I dare plenty. Question is, do you takes a special kind of coward to threaten women?" "I made no threats." "Sure you did. Wrapped them up pretty. But they're threats all the same." Cole stepped forward, and James instinctively backed up. "Here's one that isn't wrapped. Leave now. Don't come back. Don't speak to Mrs. Reeves again. Don't even think her name." "Or what you'll shoot me, add murder to your list of crimes." James's laugh was ugly. "Oh, yes, I know about you. Maddox. Thornton was very informative. Wanted man. Aren't you how fortunate that Marshal Carver is still in the territory? One telegram and—" The crack of Marigold's palm against his cheek echoed through the barn. James staggered, more from shock than force, hand rising to his reddening face. "You always were a snake," she said conversationally. "Even at 17, I could see it. That's why I chose Thomas over you. That's why I'd choose anyone over you." "You'll regret this." His civilized mask had fallen completely now, revealing the ugliness beneath. "Both of you. I'll see him hang, and you—" "You'll what?" She stepped into his space, and he actually retreated. "Ruin me. I've been ruined by better men than you. Threaten me. I've been threatened by Confederate cavalry and lived— Take my farm. You're welcome to try." Something in her expression must have finally penetrated his rage. He straightened his coat with shaking hands. "This isn't over." "Yes," she said simply. "It is. It was over the day I left for the war instead of marrying you. Now get off my land before I show you what I learned about anatomy in those field hospitals." He left, but the damage was done. They stood in the barn's silence, processing what had just happened. "He'll follow through," Cole said finally. "Men like that always do." "I know." "He'll bring the marshal, maybe federal authorities." "I know." "Marigold." She turned to him, seeing her own understanding reflected in his eyes. Their careful dance was ending, forced to a conclusion by circumstances beyond their control. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Day or two at most. Depends how fast he can get word out." "Then we'd better make them count." He caught her meaning, his expression cycling through denial, longing, and finally, resignation. This won't end well. It was never going to end well. We both knew that. She moved closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "But I'd rather have 2 honest days than a lifetime of pretending." His control finally shattered. He pulled her against him, holding her like she might disappear, face buried in her hair. "I should have left months ago." "I know." She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, memorizing it. "I'm glad you didn't." They stood like that as afternoon shadows lengthened, holding each other in a barn that smelled of hay and heartbreak. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain or worse. When they finally drew apart, something had been decided without words. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as employer and hired hand, not as widow and drifter, but as 2 people who'd found each other despite all odds and refused to pretend otherwise. "I should go to town," Marigold said. "See the lawyer, put affairs in order." "I'll come with you." "People will talk. Let them." He touched her face gently. I'm done hiding what you mean to me. And what's that? What do I mean to you? He was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing her cheekbone. Everything, he said simply. You mean everything? The words should have frightened her. Instead, they felt like coming home after a long, terrible journey. She caught his hand, pressed a kiss to his palm. Then let's stop wasting time. They left the barn together, walking toward the house as the first drops of rain began to fall. Behind them, thunder rolled across the prairie like a promise or a threat. Ahead waited lawyers and lawmen and the judgment of a world that didn't understand. But for now, for these precious hours before the storm truly broke, they had each other. It would have to be enough. It was everything. The town hall had never been so packed. Every bench groaned under the weight of curious neighbors, and more stood along the walls like carrion birds waiting for a feast. Marigold entered with her head high, wearing her best black dress, the one she'd worn to her father's funeral. It seemed appropriate for another kind of death. Whispers followed her progress down the aisle. She caught fragments. Always was too proud. That poor Morrison boy, living in sin. She let them wash over her like water, keeping her eyes fixed on the front where Mayor Henderson sat with the town council. Mrs. Reeves. The mayor's voice boomed unnecessarily in the enclosed space. Thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had a choice. She took the seat indicated, alone in a sea of judgment. This is an informal hearing, not a trial, Henderson clarified, though his tone suggested otherwise. We've received some concerning reports about your situation. As leaders of this community, we felt it necessary to address them. By concerning reports, you mean gossip from Robert Thornton and James Morrison. A ripple went through the crowd. Henderson's face reddened. Mr. Thornton and Mr. Morrison are respected members of society, who both wanted my land and were refused. Curious how their concern for propriety only emerged after rejection. Mrs. Reeves. Councilman Davies leaned forward, his thin face pinched with disapproval. The issue at hand is your harboring of a known fugitive. Cole Maddox is my employee. He's worked my farm honestly for months. Are you aware there's a warrant for his arrest in Kansas? I'm aware there are accusations. I'm also aware that accusations aren't proof. The warrant says he's wanted for questioning. The voice from the back made everyone turn. Theodore Blackwood, the town's elderly lawyer, made his way forward with the help of a cane. Not the same as being charged, certainly not the same as being convicted. Mr. Blackwood, the mayor said with clear reluctance, this isn't your concern. Justice is everyone's concern. He reached Marigold's side, patting her shoulder gently. Besides, Mrs. Reeves engaged my services yesterday, making this very much my concern. The old lawyer's presence shifted the room's energy. He'd been practicing law since before Nebraska was a territory, and even those who disagreed with him respected his knowledge. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, producing a sheaf of papers. I've been in communication with colleagues in Kansas. The circumstances surrounding Samuel Maddox's death are questionable at best. Several witnesses have since recanted their testimonies. There's strong evidence of judicial malfeasance. That's not the issue, Davies protested. The moral question. Ah, yes, the moral question. Blackwood's eyes twinkled with sharp intelligence. A widow employing a man to work her farm. Scandalous. Nothing like Mr. Thornton's 3 mistresses in Lincoln, or Mr. Morrison's interesting business practices that led to his hasty departure from Chicago. The crowd stirred, hungry for new gossip. Thornton, sitting in the front row, turned purple. You can't prove. Can't I? Blackwood produced more papers. Amazing what a few telegrams can uncover. But we're not here to discuss your moral failings, are we? We're here because Mrs. Reeves had the audacity to survive on her own terms. "She's living with a man outside wedlock, Mrs." Davies shrilled from the audience. "Living in the same house," Blackwood corrected mildly. "With separate quarters. Many farmers have such arrangements with hired help. Or should we examine everyone's domestic situations?" Marigold found her voice. "May I speak?" Henderson nodded reluctantly. She stood, turning to face the packed hall. These people had been her neighbors for years. Some had known her since childhood. Others had whispered about her since she'd returned from the war. Changed and strange. "My father built our farm with his own hands," she began. "When I returned from the war, he welcomed me home without question, though I know I wasn't the daughter who'd left. We worked that land together until he died, and I've worked it alone since." The room had gone quiet, even the whispers dying away. "When my barn burned, Cole Maddox risked his life to save my horses. He's worked beside me, honestly, asking only for room and board and modest wages. If that makes me a woman of loose morals, then I accept the title." "Mrs. Reeves," Henderson began, but she continued over him. "I spent 4 years watching men die. Good men, bad men. Boys who should have been home helping with harvest instead of bleeding out in hospital tents. I learned that death doesn't care about propriety or what the neighbors think." She found friendly faces in the crowd, the Hartleys. Looking troubled, but not unkind, young Sarah Mitchell, who'd lost her husband last winter and knew about managing alone. Even Sheriff Dawson seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings. "You want to know what's improper? Improper is spreading lies about a good man because he protected me from unwanted advances. Improper is trying to force a woman from her land because she won't accept your suit. Improper is using the law as a weapon for petty revenge." "Are you accusing—" Morrison started from his seat. "I'm stating facts." She pulled out her own papers, the ones Blackwood had helped her prepare. "My father wrote letters, kept records. He knew about Morrison's attempts to buy our land through intimidation. He documented Thornton's efforts to dam the creek that waters our fields. It's all here, witnessed and notarized." Blackwood took the papers, holding them high. "Any attempt to force Mrs. Reeves from her property will be met with legal action. Any continued harassment will result in charges being filed, and any attempt to arrest Cole Maddox without proper federal authority will be challenged in court." "He's still a fugitive," Davies insisted weakly. "Then where are the federal marshals?" Blackwood asked. "Where's the official demand for extradition? A 7-year-old warrant that was likely issued to cover up judicial murder doesn't carry much weight without follow-through." The door burst open, and Cole stood there, hat in hand, breathing hard. He'd obviously run from the farm. His eyes found Marigold immediately, checking she was unharmed. "Mr. Maddox," Henderson said heavily, "your presence here is ill-advised." "Heard there was a meeting about me. Figured I should attend." He walked forward, and people shrank back as if he carried disease. Only Marigold stepped toward him. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "Couldn't stay away." His eyes held hers for a moment before he turned to face the council. "You want the truth? Here it is. My brother died for a crime he didn't commit. I tried to get justice through proper channels and got a target on my back for the trouble. I've been running ever since." "You admit you're wanted?" "I admit there's a piece of paper with my name on it. But I've harmed no one, stolen nothing. My only crime is asking why a judge's son walked free while my brother hung for his crime." "That's a serious accusation," Henderson said. "It's the truth. And if anyone wants to test it, let them bring real law here. Federal marshals, proper investigation. I'll answer to legitimate authority, not to gossip and grudges." "In the meantime," Blackwood added, "Mr. Maddox remains gainfully employed and has my representation. Any attempt to apprehend him without due process will be vigorously contested." The crowd murmured. Opinion clearly divided, but the legal threats had landed. Henderson looked to his fellow councilmen, seeing reluctance in their faces. "This hearing finds no actionable evidence of wrongdoing," he said finally, each word clearly painful. "However, we strongly encourage all parties to consider the appearance of their arrangements." "Noted," Marigold said dryly. "Are we dismissed?" Henderson waved them away, already turning to quiet the erupting arguments. Blackwood guided them out, moving surprisingly quickly for his age. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed impossibly bright after the dim hall. Marigold breathed deep, feeling like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "That was—" Cole started. "Foolish," Blackwood supplied cheerfully. "Brave, probably temporary, but it bought time." He patted Marigold's arm. "Your father would be proud. Always said you had more spine than sense." "What happens now?" she asked. Now they'll grumble and gossip, but they'll think twice before moving directly. The legal threats will hold them for a while, but—" His expression grew serious. "This isn't over. Morrison and Thornton won't give up easily, and if real federal involvement comes—" "We'll face that when it happens," Marigold said firmly. Blackwood studied them both, the widow in her funeral dress and the wanted man standing protectively beside her. "You know, there is one solution that would silence most of the moral objections." Heat flooded Marigold's cheeks as his meaning registered. Beside her, Cole went very still. "Mr. Blackwood." "Just an observation." The old lawyer's eyes twinkled. "Amazing how a simple ceremony changes everything in the eyes of society. But that's neither here nor there. Good day to you both." He hobbled away, leaving them standing in the dusty street. Around them, people emerged from the hall, some nodding acknowledgement, others pointedly looking away. The battle was won, but the war continued. "You shouldn't have come," Marigold said again, but without heat. "Couldn't let you face them alone." "I had Blackwood. You had me too, always have me." The simple declaration made her throat tight. She wanted to touch him, to take his hand, but too many eyes watched. Instead, she started walking toward where they'd left the wagon. "Marigold," his voice stopped her. "What Blackwood said was an old man's rambling." She kept her tone light, though her pulse raced. "We should get back. The animals need tending." He let it drop, but she felt the weight of unspoken words between them as they drove home. The afternoon stretched golden across the prairie, peaceful in stark contrast to the morning's confrontation. They'd won a reprieve. Nothing more. But as Cole helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist, she thought perhaps a reprieve was all anyone could ask for in this uncertain world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison would scheme, Thornton would plot, the town would whisper. But today, they'd stood together in public and declared themselves, not in words of love or promises of forever, but in the simple act of refusing to be driven apart. For now, it was victory enough. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds that turned afternoon into twilight. Marigold stood in the barn doorway, watching lightning fork across the prairie while thunder rattled the newly rebuilt walls. "Going to be a bad one," Cole said behind her, carrying in the last of the tools. They'd spent the day racing against the weather, securing everything that could blow away, reinforcing the chicken coop, checking the barn's fresh construction, as if in response to his words. The wind picked up, driving dust and debris before it. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. "The horses," Marigold started, already in their stalls, fed and watered. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth against the sudden chill. Nothing to do now but wait it out. The first fat raindrop spattered the ground, quickly becoming a deluge. Within minutes, the yard had transformed into a muddy lake. Then came the hail, small at first, like pebbles thrown by an angry child, but growing larger with each passing moment. "Inside," Cole ordered, pulling the barn door shut and barring it. "This could spawn twisters." They ran for the house, pelted by ice and rain. Stumbling through the door just as the hail reached the size of walnuts, the windows rattled ominously, and Marigold found herself pressing closer to the glass, mesmerized by nature's violence. "Get back," Cole said sharply, pulling her away just as something struck the window hard enough to crack it. "Middle of the house, away from anything that could break." They retreated to the kitchen, the most sheltered room, listening to the storm's fury. The roof groaned under the assault. Somewhere outside, wood splintered the fence they'd just repaired. Or maybe worse. "The cellar," Marigold said, but Cole was already heading for the door. "Wait." He grabbed blankets, the lamp, matches. "If the house goes—" She didn't need him to finish. If the house was destroyed, they'd need supplies. She added water, what food she could quickly grab, her father's strongbox with the important papers. The cellar was damp and musty, carved from the earth by her father's hands years ago. They descended into darkness, Cole going first with the lamp, testing each step. Above them, the storm raged like a living thing, furious and wild. They arranged the blankets on the packed earth floor, creating a small island of relative comfort. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the space feel both intimate and vast. "I hate storms," Marigold admitted, surprising herself. Ever since the war, the cannon fire during battles, it sounded like thunder. For months after, every storm sent me back to those field hospitals. Cole shifted closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could lean if she wanted. "What brought you out of it?" "Time, work, my father's patience." She smiled sadly. "He'd sit with me during storms, talking about anything and everything to keep my mind off the sound." "What did he talk about?" "The farm, mostly. Plans for the future. Which fields to plant. What improvements to make. Dreams that seemed impossible but kept us looking forward." A particularly violent crack of thunder made her flinch. He'd be horrified by all this. Me, alone with a man. The town talking. Would he? She considered. No, probably not. He was practical above all else. He'd have liked that you work hard and don't waste words. She paused. He'd have liked you. I'd have liked to meet him. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm. The fury above seemed distant here, muffled by earth and stone, in the lamplight. Cole's face was all plains and shadows, the scar a silver thread across his weathered skin. "Tell me about your mother," Marigold said. "You mentioned she was a teacher." His expression softened. "Elizabeth Maddox, taught in a one-room schoolhouse before she married my father. Kept teaching us even after, said education was the only thing no one could take away." He smiled at some memory. "She'd have us recite poetry while doing chores. Sam hated it, but I didn't mind. Still remember some of it." "Recite something?" He looked embarrassed. "It's been years. Please." He was quiet for a moment, then began in a low voice. "I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light." The words rolled through the cellar, beautiful and sad. Marigold found herself holding her breath. "I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain." Thunder crashed overhead, but neither flinched, caught in the spell of words and lamplight. "That's beautiful," she whispered, "and heartbreaking." Frost knew about darkness, about being outside looking in. His eyes met hers. "I understood it better after Sam died, walking through towns where everyone belonged except me. You belong here." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Cole's hand found hers in the dim light, fingers intertwining naturally. "Do I?" "Yes? Simple? Certain? True." He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent fire through her veins. "Marigold." "I know all the reasons why not," she said quickly. I know the danger. I know what people think. I don't care. You should care. But I don't. She turned to face him fully. I spent years caring what people thought, trying to be the daughter they expected, the widow they approved of. All it brought was loneliness. And I've brought you scandal. You've brought me life. The confession came out fierce. For the first time since the war, I feel alive. Not just surviving, but living. Is that wrong? No. His free hand rose to cup her cheek. But I'm selfish enough to stay, even though I should go. Selfish enough to want— What do you want? His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch feather-light but burning. Everything, things I have no right to want, a future that's impossible. Nothing's impossible. Marigold. She silenced him with a kiss. Not gentle or tentative, but fierce with months of denial and the knowledge that time was precious. He made a sound deep in his throat and pulled her closer, responding with equal desperation. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the storm seemed to have quieted. Or maybe she just couldn't hear it over the pounding of her heart. This changes everything, he said roughly. Everything's already changed, has been changing since the night you saved my horses. I should have ridden on, should have been strong enough. To what? Leave me alone, let me slowly fade into the bitter woman everyone expected me to become. She gripped his shirt, holding him when he might have pulled back. You saved more than horses that night. Cole Maddox, you saved me. You saved yourself. I just witnessed it. We saved each other, then— He kissed her again, softer this time, with something that felt like reverence. When he pulled back, his expression was torn between wonder and worry. I've nothing to offer you, no name worth having, no security, no future that doesn't include looking over our shoulders. I'm not asking for any of that. What are you asking for? She considered carefully. Above them, the storm was definitely weakening, reduced to steady rain and distant rumbles. Soon they'd have to emerge, face whatever damage awaited, return to the complicated dance of their public lives. I'm asking for honesty, for whatever time we have, for you to stop protecting me from choices I've already made. And if those choices lead to harm, then we face it together, like we faced the town meeting, like we're facing this storm. She pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat against her palm. I'm tired of being careful, Cole, tired of living half a life because the full one might hurt. He was quiet for so long she thought he might withdraw, might rebuild the walls she'd just torn down. Then he exhaled, tension leaving his body like a departing spirit. All right. You win. A small smile touched his lips. Though I suspect you always do. Only in things that matter. They stayed in the cellar until the storm truly passed, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. He told her more about Sam, about their mother's death from fever, about the years of drifting that had brought him to her door. She shared memories of the war she'd never spoken aloud, of the men who'd died holding her hand, of the strength it took to come home to a place that no longer understood her. When they finally emerged, stars were beginning to peek through breaking clouds. The yard was a disaster, fences down, debris everywhere, half the new roof tiles scattered like playing cards. But the house stood. The barn stood. They stood. It'll take days to clean up, Marigold said, surveying the damage. We've got time. Do we? He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. It was the first time he'd touched her so casually, so publicly, though there was no one to see but the stars. For now, we do. Tomorrow, next week, next month, who knows? But tonight we're here, we're whole, and we're together. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Sometimes that's all anyone gets. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the prairie dripped and settled, recovering from nature's violence. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of repair, the ongoing challenge of their precarious situation, the the judgment of neighbors and the schemes of enemies. But tonight, standing in the ruins of the storm, held by the man she'd chosen against all wisdom, Marigold felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. It might be temporary, fragile as the calm after the storm, but it was real, and it was theirs. And for now, for this precious now, it was enough. The first shoots of green wheat pushed through the dark earth like promises kept. Marigold knelt between the rows, fingers gentle on the tender plants, checking their progress. 6 weeks since the storm, and the farm showed signs of renewal everywhere: fresh fence posts, repaired barn doors, and now this, the crop that would secure their future. "Looking good," Cole said from behind her, carrying buckets of water from the well. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, making him look younger somehow. Or maybe that was just the ease that had settled into his features lately. Better than good. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "If the weather holds, this'll be the best harvest we've had in years." He set down the buckets, a small smile playing at his lips. She met his eyes steadily. "Unless you're planning on leaving before harvest." "Thought we agreed to stop talking about leaving." "Did we?" He crossed to her, movements unhurried. In the week since the storm, they'd stopped pretending, at least when alone. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, studying her like she was something precious. "Marigold Reeves, you know I'm not going anywhere." "Prove it." His kiss was answer enough, deep and sure and tasting of coffee and morning. When they parted, she was breathless and laughing. "The wheat needs water," she said without much conviction. "The wheat can wait 5 minutes." But the sound of wagon wheels on the road made them step apart, old habits of caution not entirely forgotten. Thomas Brennan appeared around the bend, his usual cheerful expression replaced by something grave. "Morning, folks," he called, pulling up near the house. "Afraid I've got news." Marigold's stomach tightened. "What kind of news?" "Mixed kind." He climbed down, accepting the cup of water Cole offered. "First, the good that Marshal Carver finally left the territory. Seems he got tired of waiting for something that wasn't coming. And the bad." Thomas hesitated. "Morrison and Thornton have been busy. They've petitioned the territorial governor, claiming you're unfit to hold land, being a woman alone and all." "I'm not alone," Marigold said flatly. "No, but without marriage papers." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "They're saying it's improper, that the land should be managed by a man of good standing. They've even offered to buy it at what they call a fair price. Half what it's worth, no doubt." "Less." Cole's hands clenched into fists. "They can't just take her land." "No, but they can make it mighty difficult to keep it. Tie things up in legal battles. Question the validity of her father's will. Challenge her capacity to manage property." Thomas sighed. "I'm sorry to bring such news, but I figured you should know what's being said in town." After he left, they stood in the kitchen, processing this new threat. The morning's joy felt distant now, overshadowed by the relentless pressure of those who couldn't stand to see her succeed. "There is one way to stop this," Cole said quietly. She knew what he meant. Blackwood had hinted at it. Thomas had just reinforced it. Marriage would solve the legal challenges, silence most of the moral objections. But, "I won't have you marry me to save my land." "What if I want to marry you for other reasons?" Her heart stuttered. "Do you—" He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Marigold, I've been a lot of things. Farmer, brother, fugitive. But the only thing I've been that matters is yours. From that first night watching you work alone, I've been yours." "Cole." "Let me finish. I know I've got nothing to offer. No money, no respected name, no certainty except that I'll protect you with everything I have." His thumbs rubbed circles on her palms. "But if you'll have me, I'd like to make it official. Not for the land or the gossips or the legal papers. For us." She studied his face. This man who'd arrived with fire and stayed through storms, who worked beside her without making her feel weak, who understood her ghosts because he carried his own. "You think this could be home?" she asked, echoing his question from what felt like a lifetime ago. "It already is." His words mirrored her long-ago answer. "You're my home." "Then yes." "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. Yes to facing whatever comes together." She freed one hand to touch his face. "But I need you to understand this isn't about saving me. I don't need saving." "I know. Maybe it's about saving me instead." "Maybe it's about saving each other." They were married 3 days later in the small church, with Blackwood officiating and the Hartleys as witnesses. Marigold wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit and yellow with age, but still beautiful. Cole had somehow procured a proper suit, though he tugged at the collar like it was strangling him. The church was nearly empty. Most of the town either disapproved or feared taking sides. But Sarah Mitchell was there, and Thomas Brennan with his family, and a handful of others who valued courage over conformity. "Do you, Cole Maddox, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Blackwood's voice filled the small space. "I do." Clear, certain, his eyes never leaving hers. "And do you, Marigold Reeves, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words came out fierce, like a battle cry. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I pronounce you man and wife." Cole's kiss was gentle, appropriate for the public setting, but his hand trembled slightly where it cupped her cheek, and she knew he felt the magnitude of this moment as deeply as she did. Outside, they found Sheriff Dawson waiting. "Congratulations," he said, tipping his hat. "Wanted to let you know, got word from Kansas yesterday. Seems Judge Morrison's being investigated for corruption. His son confessed to the horse theft, among other things. They're dropping all charges against you, Maddox." Cole went very still. "What?" "You're a free man. Have been for weeks, apparently. But the paperwork just caught up." Dawson's weathered face cracked into a rare smile. "Figured today was a good day to deliver good news." Marigold gripped Cole's hand as he processed this information. 7 years of running. Ended just like that. He was free. He could go anywhere, be anyone, start fresh without looking over his shoulder. "Well," Cole said finally, "that's unexpected." Dawson laughed. "That's one way to put it. Anyway, thought you should know, ma'am." He touched his hat again and ambled away. They stood in the churchyard, hand in hand, adjusting to this new reality. Free. Both of them free her from the expectations and limitations placed on a woman alone. Him from the shadow of injustice that had driven him to her door. "You could go anywhere now," Marigold said softly. "Back to Kansas. Further west. Anywhere you wanted." Cole turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm exactly where I want to be." "You're sure? Marigold Maddox?" He seemed to savor the name. "I've been a lot of places, seen a lot of things, but I've never been more sure of anything than I am of this." He gestured to the church, the town, the prairie, stretching endlessly beyond. "This is home. Your home. Why would I go anywhere else?" The ride back to the farm, their farm now, legally and properly, was quiet but charged with possibility. As they crested the hill that overlooked their land, Marigold pulled up the horses. The wheat fields spread before them, green and growing in the afternoon sun. The barn stood solid and true, rebuilt from ashes. The house waited, no longer empty but full of promise. "You think this could be home?" Cole asked again, but now it was playful. "Loving." Marigold laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie like bird song. "It already is." They climbed down from the wagon, and Cole swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. Inside, the late afternoon sun slanted through windows, painting everything golden. "What now?" she asked as he set her down. "Now," He pulled her close, and she could feel his smile against her hair. Now we plant more wheat, fix more fences, face more storms, build a life. Together. Together. He pulled back to look at her. No more running, no more hiding. Just us and this land and whatever comes next. I like the sound of that. As the sun set over their fields, Marigold stood in the doorway of her father's house. Her house, their house, and felt the last of the old ghosts slip away. The war, the loneliness, the years of just surviving, all of it fading like morning mist. In its place, something new and strong and absolutely certain, the knowledge that she'd found her match in this quiet man with gentle hands and fierce loyalty. That together they'd weather whatever storms came, literal or figurative. Cole appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. No regrets? He asked softly. None. You? Only one. She tensed slightly. What? That it took me so long to find you. She relaxed back against him, smiling. You found me exactly when you were supposed to. Wise woman. A lucky man. The luckiest. They stood there as full dark settled over the prairie. Two people who'd been broken by life and put back together stronger. Who'd found in each other not just love, but understanding. Partnership. Home. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. The wheat would need tending. The town gossips would need facing. Morrison and Thornton would likely make more trouble before accepting defeat. But tonight, in their house on the prairie, with the vast Nebraska sky stretched above them like a blessing, Cole and Marigold Maddox were exactly where they belonged. Together. Home. Complete. The wheat grew tall that summer, golden and abundant, the best harvest anyone could remember. And if sometimes townspeople saw the couple working side by side in the fields, saw the way they moved in easy rhythm, the way they smiled at private jokes, the way they'd built something beautiful from ashes and stubbornness and trust, well, perhaps even the harshest critics had to admit that some things that started wrong could end up absolutely right. After all, the prairie had always rewarded those brave enough to plant in difficult soil, patient enough to tend what grew, and wise enough to recognize home when they found it. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Marigold and Cole's journey from that first night of fire to their hard-won happiness. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. Until next time, partners.